The city was alive with the quiet hum of wealth. Sleek cars lined the streets, glass towers glittered in the morning sun. And at the very heart of it all stood Whitmore Academy, the kind of school where tuition cost more than most people's yearly income. Inside, children of millionaires sat in spotless classrooms learning from the best tutors money could buy. But just beyond its tall iron gates, a very different story was unfolding. Richard Sterling, billionaire and tech mogul, walked briskly past the academy one afternoon, his mind consumed with board meetings and investment reports. He barely noticed the chatter of students or the scent of freshly cut grass, but then he froze. Just beyond the academy fence, his 11-year-old daughter Emma sat cross-legged on the ground, notebooks scattered around her. And opposite her, on the other side of the iron bars, sat a girl about the same age, barefoot, her jeans torn at the knees, her hair uncombed. She held a broken piece of chalk like it was gold. Richard's eyes narrowed. Who was this child? Emma's head was bent in concentration as the stranger scribbled equations on a scrap of cardboard propped against the fence. Richard took a step closer, his breath catching. It wasn't childish doodles, it was calculus. Complex numbers, angles, lines, concepts Emma's expensive tutors had failed to explain. Yet here was this ragged girl, breaking it down with ease, her voice steady, her logic clear. Emma's face lit up with understanding, a spark Richard hadn't seen in years. She nodded eagerly, erasing mistakes, copying symbols. She was learning. Not just learning, thriving. Richard's chest tightened. For months he'd hired the best, paid the most, demanded results. And still Emma struggled. Yet here, sitting on the dirty sidewalk, a barefoot girl had done what money could not. The girl smiled faintly, though her eyes carried shadows far older than her age. She tapped the cardboard, guiding Emma's pencil with gentle patience. Every gesture spoke of knowledge, resilience, and something Richard could not quite name. He stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching the gravel. The girl looked up. Their eyes met, one world of privilege colliding with another of poverty. And in that instant, Richard realized something that shook him to his core. Why was his daughter learning more from a homeless child outside the gates than from the entire empire of wealth he had built inside them? The moment lingered. Richard Sterling stood frozen, still staring at the barefoot girl who had somehow unlocked his daughter's mind. His chest tightened with something he couldn't quite name. Anger? Curiosity? Or was it fear that all his wealth had failed in the one place it mattered most? Emma noticed him and stiffened, quickly gathering her papers. "Daddy," she whispered nervously, as though she had been caught breaking a rule. The girl on the other side of the fence lowered her eyes, clutching the stub of chalk tightly as if expecting punishment for even daring to exist. Richard's sharp gaze softened for a moment. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice lower than usual but still carrying the weight of command. The girl glanced at Emma, uncertain if she should answer. Her voice finally emerged, quiet but steady. "My name is Zara." Her words trembled with humility, yet there was dignity behind them, an inner strength Richard hadn't expected. Emma rushed to explain. "Daddy, she's been helping me. She's the reason I passed my last test. I couldn't understand anything the tutor said, but Zara makes it simple. She knows everything." Richard's brows furrowed. A child who looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Teaching calculus? The idea seemed absurd. And yet, he had seen it with his own eyes. His attention shifted back to Zara. Her clothes were worn, faded from too many washes, or perhaps not washed at all. Her shoes were gone entirely. Her eyes, though, burned with intelligence. She didn't flinch beneath his stare. In fact, there was a quiet defiance there, as though she knew the value of her mind and refused to let poverty take that from her. "Where do you live?" Richard asked, her lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated, and for a moment he thought she might stay silent. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Nowhere permanent." Emma cut in quickly as though defending her friend. "She and her grandmother, they stay in a car near the old library. But Daddy, she's brilliant. You should see how she explains numbers. It's like she can make them dance." "I actually understand now." Richard's throat tightened. He had built companies worth billions, invested in artificial intelligence, and funded research teams across the globe. And here was a child, homeless, overlooked, doing what none of them could do: reach his daughter. The air grew heavy with unspoken truths. Emma's wide, pleading eyes searched his face for understanding, while Zara stood silently, almost like a shadow. She was used to being invisible. To most of the world, she didn't matter, but Richard couldn't look away. The academy's bell rang, its polished chime echoing across manicured lawns. Students in crisp uniforms poured out laughing, swinging designer backpacks. Their voices filled the air, but none of them noticed Zara, standing barefoot against the fence. To them, she was less than nothing. Richard's heart pounded. A question clawed at his mind. What kind of world had he built, where brilliance could be locked outside the gates simply because it wore the wrong clothes? Emma clutched his arm, her voice trembling with urgency. "Daddy, please, don't be angry with her. She was only trying to help me." Richard looked at his daughter, then back at Zara. Two girls the same age, separated not by ability but by circumstance. One had everything and still felt empty. The other had nothing but carried a mind that could rival the greatest scholars he had ever met. For the first time in years, Richard Sterling felt powerless, and deep inside, a haunting thought whispered, a thought that would not let him go. If this child, living in a broken car, could achieve so much with nothing, then what did that say about him? A man who had everything yet failed to give his daughter what she truly needed. The day after Richard's startling discovery, the autumn sun dipped low over Detroit. Golden light filtered through the trees that lined the edges of Whitmore Academy. Children poured out of classrooms, their laughter ringing in the air like bells. Among them, Emma Sterling lingered near the fence, her eyes searching for Zara's familiar silhouette. She spotted her across the street, crouched beside an elderly woman whose body trembled against the chill of the wind. The woman clutched a worn satchel and muttered to herself, her gray hair wild, her hands shaking as if holding onto memories that slipped through her fingers. Emma's stomach twisted. That must be Zara's grandmother. Zara tried to steady the woman, whispering soothing words, but suddenly the old woman's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the sidewalk. "Grandma!" Zara's cry pierced the air. She shook the frail body, her own thin arms trembling. Panic surged across her face. She turned her head desperately, eyes scanning for help. Emma's scream followed. "Daddy, somebody help!" Richard Sterling had been waiting by his car. He sprinted across the street, his polished shoes hammering the pavement. For the first time in years, his instincts weren't about business, money, or power. They were about humanity. He crouched beside Zara and the unconscious woman. "She's not waking up," Zara sobbed, her hands clutching her grandmother's wrist, checking for a pulse. Richard snapped into action, his voice calm but firm. "Call an ambulance." His driver pulled out a phone, dialing 911. Within minutes, flashing lights bathed the street. EMTs lifted the frail woman onto a stretcher. Zara tried to climb in after her, but one of the paramedics gently held her back. "Only family can ride. I am her family," Zara shouted, her voice cracking. Richard stepped in. "She's with me. She rides." His tone brokered no argument. The paramedic nodded. Zara clutched Emma's hand as they climbed into the ambulance, tears streaking her face. Richard followed, silent, shaken by how easily this stranger's emergency had pulled him into its orbit. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and worry. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved with practiced urgency, and in the corner of a small room, Zara sat hunched in a plastic chair. Her eyes were red, her fingers knotted together so tightly they left marks on her skin. Emma sat beside her, refusing to leave. Richard stood near the doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets, feeling out of place but unable to walk away. Finally, the door opened. A doctor in a crisp white coat entered, her expression calm but tinged with sadness. She studied the chart in her hands, then looked up at Zara. "Your grandmother, Grace Johnson. She suffered a severe collapse. Her Alzheimer's is progressing quickly." Zara's lips parted, but no words came. The doctor knelt, her voice softening. "I know this is hard to hear, but she needs treatment, an advanced therapy that could slow the disease. Without it," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "she will decline faster than we want." "How much?" Zara's voice was a whisper. The doctor hesitated. $50,000. The number struck the room like a thunderclap. Emma gasped. Richard's jaw tightened. Zara's small hands balled into fists. 50,000? She and her grandmother couldn't even find enough for food most nights. To her, that number might as well have been 50 million. Tears slid down her face. "I can't lose her. She's all I have. The doctor placed a hand on her shoulder. I wish I could do more. Your grandmother. She was once my teacher. She taught me in 7th grade. She believed in me when no one else did. The doctor's eyes softened with recognition. I owe her so much. Richard blinked. Another thread tied back to this woman. First his daughter, now this doctor. How many lives had Grace Johnson touched? The doctor left quietly. The room sank into silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Zara pressed her forehead against the edge of her grandmother's bed. "You can't leave me," she whispered through sobs. "Not like this. Not now." Grace stirred, her frail hand twitching against the sheets. Slowly her eyes opened, cloudy but searching. Her lips moved, barely audible. "The debt must be paid," Zara froze. "Grandma?" Her grandmother's gaze locked onto Richard Sterling, standing tall and helpless near the door. Her voice cracked, but the words were clear. "The debt has to be paid." Richard's stomach tightened. He had no idea what she meant, but the weight of those words settled on him like a burden he couldn't yet name. Emma's small hand found Zara's. Both girls looked to Richard, their eyes filled with desperate hope, and an unspoken question he could not escape. Would he walk away like a billionaire, or stay like a man who owed a debt he never knew existed? The sterile glow of the hospital hallway seemed endless. Richard Sterling paced slowly, his thoughts heavier than the silence around him. In the room behind him, Grace Johnson lay still, her fragile chest rising and falling against the hum of machines. Zara refused to leave her side, her small hands gripping her grandmother's as if sheer willpower could keep the woman alive. Emma sat on the floor just outside, her notebook clutched to her chest. She wasn't writing equations anymore, just doodles, shaky lines meant to distract her from the storm in her heart. When her father finally stopped pacing, she looked up. "Daddy," she whispered, "I need to know who she is. I need to know why Grandma Grace said what she did." Richard frowned. "She's just a sick woman. You should rest." But Emma's eyes burned with something that startled him. Determination. "No, she's not just anyone. She helped me learn when no one else could. And she said, the debt has to be paid." "What does that mean?" "What debt?" Richard swallowed hard. He had no answers. Emma pressed on. "I'm going to find out, with or without you." That night, while Richard made tense phone calls in the lobby, Emma crept into the hospital library. Her fingers skimmed through dusty archives, old newspapers stacked neatly in forgotten corners. She searched names, headlines, anything connected to Grace Johnson. Then, she found it, an article dated 1989. The bold headline leapt off the page, "Local teacher saves child from fiery crash." Emma's eyes raced over the text. The details burned into her memory. A car accident, flames consuming twisted metal. A teacher, Grace Johnson, pulling a 7-year-old girl from the wreckage, risking her life to carry the child to safety. The child's name, Catherine Miller. Emma's breath caught. Catherine Miller. Her mother, hands trembling, she traced the faded photograph. There in black and white was a younger Grace Johnson, her face streaked with soot, cradling a small, terrified girl. The girl's wide eyes looked so familiar. The same eyes Emma saw in the mirror every day. Her knees went weak. She stumbled back, clutching the paper as if it were proof of something too big to comprehend. Grace Johnson, the grandmother of Zara, the barefoot genius, had once saved her own mother's life. The words her grandmother had whispered earlier suddenly carried weight. The debt has to be paid. Emma felt tears blur her vision. She rushed back to the hospital room, shoving the article at her father. "Read it," she demanded, "now." Richard took the paper reluctantly, but as his eyes scanned the story, his face drained of color. His hands shook. Memories long buried clawed their way back. His late wife Catherine telling him once, years ago, that she owed her life to a stranger. He had dismissed it then, too consumed with business to care about old stories. But here it was, in black and white. Unshakable truth. Richard lowered the paper slowly. His daughter's voice quivered. "Daddy, don't you see? If Grace hadn't saved Mom that night, I wouldn't even be here. You wouldn't have had her, you wouldn't have had me. We owe her everything. And now she needs us." The weight of her words crushed him. For years, he had built an empire of glass and steel, convinced he was untouchable. But in this moment, standing in the sterile hospital light, Richard Sterling realized that his fortune, his legacy, His very family, all of it, existed because of a single act of courage by a woman now lying powerless in a hospital bed. Emma's eyes filled with tears. How can you walk away from this? How can you stand there and do nothing when everything we have is because of her? Richard's throat closed. For once, he had no rebuttal, no rationalization. He turned, looking through the glass at Grace's fragile form. Memories of Catherine, her laughter, her warmth, her untimely death flooded back. The connection was undeniable. Zara, silent until now, rose from her chair. Her voice cracked but carried fire. My grandmother gave your wife a future. She gave your daughter a chance to exist. And we have nothing. She's dying and no one cares because we live in a car. But I won't beg. Not from you. Not from anyone. Her words cut deeper than any accusation Richard had ever faced in his boardroom battles. They stripped him bare. He stepped closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over the two girls. But for once he didn't feel powerful. He felt small. The air in the room grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. Richard's voice finally broke the silence, softer than Emma had ever heard. You're right, Emma blinked. Zara's eyes widened. Richard clenched the article in his fist, his gaze fixed on Grace Johnson. She saved my family once. And maybe this is my chance to save hers. The words hung in the air like a vow. But the real question, the one twisting in Emma's chest and gnawing at Zara's heart, remained unspoken. Would he truly act on it? Or would a billionaire's guilt vanish as quickly as it appeared? The following morning, the Sterling mansion felt colder than usual. Marble floors echoed with silence and tall glass windows let in gray, unforgiving light. Richard sat alone in his study. The newspaper article about Grace Johnson spread across his desk. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her soot-streaked face holding his late wife as a child, saw the chain of fate that tied his fortune, his family, his very existence to a woman now on the brink of losing everything. Yet when his mind turned toward action, toward writing the check that could buy Grace more years, another voice interrupted. The voice of pride. The voice of habit. This isn't your responsibility. You don't owe them. Charity invites chaos. You built this empire yourself. But the words sounded hollow now. A knock on the study door broke his thoughts. Emma entered, her eyes red from crying but blazing with a determination that startled him. She carried her mother's old photo album clutched tightly to her chest. Dad, she said, her voice shaking. We can't wait. We have to help them now. Richard rubbed his temples. Emma, you don't understand. Life isn't as simple as writing a check. There are complications. Emma slammed the album down on his desk. Stop hiding behind excuses. You've spent years pretending money can fix everything. Tutors, doctors, therapists. You threw money at me like I was a broken machine you could repair. And it never worked. But when Zara helped me, when she explained things with patience and kindness, I understood. For the first time in my life, I felt smart. She gave me what all your millions couldn't. Doesn't that mean something? Her words pierced deeper than she knew. Richard's lips parted, but no defense came. Emma flipped open the album, revealing a picture of Catherine, her mother, smiling brightly, her arms around a much younger Richard. You always tell me Mom was brave, that she never gave up. Don't you think she'd want us to fight for the woman who saved her life? Richard's chest ached. The truth pressed against his ribs like a weight he could no longer carry. He looked into his daughter's tearful eyes, and for the first time in years he saw Catherine's spirit reflected back at him. But before he could respond, Emma's voice grew harder, sharper. Do you even realize how much I hate you sometimes? You buy paintings worth more than people's lives. You sit in this office building walls of money while people like Zara sleep in broken cars. And you don't care. Maybe you never cared. Richard's face stiffened. No business rival, no SEC investigation, no corporate scandal had ever cut him like those words. His daughter's hatred sliced through the armor of power he had worn for decades. You're wrong, he whispered, though the conviction in his tone was fragile. Then prove it, Emma snapped. Her small fists trembled as she pointed toward the article. Prove it by saving the woman who saved us. Silence thundered in the study. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock, each second daring him to act or remain paralyzed by pride. At that moment, Zara appeared hesitantly in the doorway, her eyes weary but blazing with quiet strength. She had come with Emma, though she had resisted at first, unwilling to beg. She stood now with her shoulders squared, her chin raised, a child forced to carry the dignity of an adult. "You don't owe us anything," she said calmly, though her voice quivered. "My grandmother taught me that knowledge is the one thing they can't take from you." She never wanted charity. She only wanted a fair chance. She stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. "But you do owe Catherine. You owe Emma. You owe yourself the truth. Without my grandmother, none of this would exist, not your empire, not this mansion, not even your daughter. You say you're a powerful man, but right now, you look powerless." Richard flinched. Her words struck deeper than any boardroom humiliation ever could. Two girls, one his blood, one a stranger, stood united against him, holding up a mirror to his soul. The walls he had built all his life, walls of wealth, logic, and distance, began to crack. He saw Catherine's face in Emma. He saw Grace's courage in Zara. And for the first time in years, he felt something raw and unshakable. Shame. Emma's voice softened, breaking the silence. "Dad, please, this is your chance. Don't let it slip away." Richard's hands trembled as he picked up his pen. The checkbook lay open before him, its pages crisp, untouched. He hovered over it, the ink ready to flow, but then he froze. Would this act truly change anything? Or would it simply be another transaction, another hollow attempt to buy away guilt? His empire had taught him to distrust feelings, to calculate risks, to measure returns. But this moment wasn't about business. It was about humanity. His breath caught, his chest tight as the weight of choice pressed down. He could walk away, retreat into the safety of his fortune, or he could take the step that terrified him most. Using his wealth not as a shield, but as a lifeline. The clock ticked louder, the air thick with expectation, and then Richard looked up at the two girls, his daughter and the stranger who felt like more than a stranger, and whispered the words that would decide everything. "I'll do it." But the question that lingered heavier than any promise was this. Would he follow through when the cost was no longer measured in money, but in confronting every truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding? The following day, Richard Sterling walked into Ashwood High. His presence drew stares immediately. Tailored suit, polished shoes, the quiet weight of power in every step. Teachers whispered, students stopped mid-conversation, and Principal Hawthorne nearly tripped over himself rushing to greet him. "Mr. Sterling, what an unexpected honor." Hawthorne's smile stretched thin, the kind that tried to hide unease. Richard wasted no time. "I'm here for Grace Johnson. She deserves better treatment. She deserves recognition. And her granddaughter, Zara, should not be punished for circumstances beyond her control." Hawthorne's face faltered. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, Mrs. Johnson has been a dedicated member of our staff. But she is, after all, a janitor. Her situation, tragic as it is, lies outside the jurisdiction of this institution. As for Zara, she lacks the financial stability required for continued enrollment. Prestige must be preserved, our reputation, you understand." Richard's jaw tightened. The condescension was sharp, dripping with the arrogance of a man who wielded authority not to uplift but to exclude. "Reputation?" Richard's voice thundered across the polished office. "What greater reputation could this school have than honoring a woman who saved lives and giving her granddaughter a chance to thrive? You speak of prestige while discarding the very values education is supposed to stand for." For a moment, Hawthorne's mask slipped, irritation breaking through. "We cannot bend the rules for every unfortunate case. That's not how institutions endure." Richard leaned in, his eyes like steel. "Institutions endure because of people like Grace Johnson, people who give without asking, who sacrifice without applause. Without her, my daughter wouldn't be here. Without her, I might not even be alive. And I'll be damned if I let this school erase her or her granddaughter." The silence that followed was suffocating. Hawthorne swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of Richard's gaze. Still, he forced a brittle smile. "I sympathize truly, but my hands are tied. Rules, Mr. Sterling, they apply to everyone." Richard straightened, his voice now colder than glass. "Then I will untie them. I'm offering a full endowment in Grace Johnson's name, a scholarship that will not only secure Zara's education, but provide opportunities for other children who face the same barriers. Decline this and you won't just answer to me. You'll answer to the public when they learn that Ashwood High values money over humanity." For once, the principal had no rehearsed reply. His lips pressed thin, his eyes darting. He knew the weight Richard carried in the city. He also knew this would cause scandal, expose the school's quiet prejudices. But just as Richard thought he had won, Hawthorne's words came low, sharp, and bitter. "Do what you must, Mr. Sterling, but know this. Charity cannot change lineage. Some children will never belong here, no matter how many checks you write." The words burned like acid. Richard's fists clenched, but he didn't strike. Instead, he turned and walked out, the decision already made. If the system resisted, he would build a new one. Outside, Emma and Zara waited anxiously on the steps. Emma rushed forward. What happened? Did he agree? Richard looked at them both. The fragile hope in Zara's eyes, the fierce determination in Emma's. For the first time, he didn't speak in business terms or vague reassurances. His voice was raw, stripped of pride. He tried to say no. Tried to tell me you don't belong. But he's wrong, you do. And I'll make sure no one forgets it. Zara's breath caught, her defenses wavering. Emma grabbed her hand, holding tight. In that moment, Richard felt something shift inside him. Not the hollow satisfaction of a deal closed, but the heavy, humbling weight of responsibility. He wasn't just saving Grace or Zara. He was saving himself from becoming the kind of man who looked away when it mattered most. But even as he made his vow, a question gnawed at the edge of his mind. Would money, even wielded for justice, ever be enough to heal wounds carved so deeply into the bones of society? Days later, the Sterling mansion was quieter than ever. Emma paced restlessly. Zara sat with her schoolbook spread out across the table, and Richard stood by the window, staring at the city skyline he had once believed he owned. Then the phone rang. Richard answered, his voice steady but his hands trembling. On the other end was the hospital. Grace Johnson had taken a turn. The world blurred. Within an hour, they were at her bedside. Machines beeped faintly. Tubes ran across her fragile frame. But her eyes, still sharp, still unbroken, lit up when she saw Zara and Emma holding hands. "Grandma," Zara whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "We're here. You're not alone." Grace's gaze drifted to Richard. For a moment, he thought she would look at him with bitterness, but instead she smiled faintly. "I knew Catherine's boy would come around." Richard's throat tightened. "I should have come sooner. I should have done more." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do more now, for her." She nodded toward Zara. "Make sure she never carries the same burdens I did." Then, with a final squeeze of Zara's hand, her eyes closed. The monitor flatlined. Silence crashed into the room. Zara buried her face in Emma's shoulder, sobbing. Richard stood frozen, every wall he had built around his heart collapsing in that single moment. He hadn't just lost Grace Johnson. He had lost the chance to ever repay her fully. But maybe repayment wasn't the point. Maybe redemption was. In the weeks that followed, Richard launched the Grace Johnson Foundation, a scholarship and mentorship program designed for children like Zara. Children overlooked by systems that worshipped wealth and reputation over humanity. Ashwood High was forced to honor Grace publicly, her story etched into its walls forever. At the unveiling ceremony, Zara stood beside Emma, no longer invisible. Reporters snapped photos as Richard spoke, not about his empire, not about power, but about humility. Grace Johnson saved lives in silence. She reminded me that the greatest legacy isn't built in boardrooms, it's built in hearts. I owe her everything. And today I vow to ensure her courage outlives us all. Applause roared. But as the cameras flashed, one lingering question burned in Richard's chest. Would it be enough to erase a lifetime of indifference? Or was this just the beginning of his true test?